Hi, good morning, America. Um, this is a Saturday in Eastern time where I'm from Indiana. So Eastern time it is 11. In the Central time it is 10 o'clock. So welcome for this 1 hour presentation. And this PD opportunity is provided by a Nebraska Department of Education World Language. And as you can see the logos over there, and also it includes CLTA, SEEK, K through 12 classroom and methodology. So today we are very honored to invite. Please allow me, Chris, to read your whole name, um, Dr. Christopher Jacobs, to give us a interactive. So interactive means teachers, you don't have to keep silent. You need to interact with the speaker, with other teachers who participate this morning. Okay, hope you get a coffee at hand. I hope you have your lunch already prepared. We will focus on this 1 hour. Um, as you can see, Chris Jacob currently teaches French, Italian. It's amazed me. Okay, French, Italian, Spanish, and second language education classes at the University of Nebraska. Um, is it Corkany? How do you
I think
pronounce that?
so. I'm not
Uh,
from around there either, so
yeah, in this position, he also,
Yeah.
yeah, um, organize a weekly conversation table. I like this way, conversation tables in 10 plus languages, lead study abroad programs to France and Italy, and organize an annual world language week prior to working at UNK. Chris taught French, Italian, Spanish, and ESL, TESOL in K-12 schools and universities in his home state of Pennsylvania. He has also worked as a translator and interpreter in medical and legal contexts, and he continues to use his translation and interpretation skills on the side, both in the US and in Europe. Um, Chris is a vice president of Nebraska active for Affiliated Language Teacher Association, NILA, where he is active in the French Teacher Affiliate Nebraska chapter of American Association of Teachers of French. So Chris is also on the board of Nebraska's Translator Interpreter Association. Chris, you have a lot of hats on. Okay. And then let's see, before Chris started, this is the central information that you wish to have before we start this conversation or this interactive activities. All right. Dr. Liu, do you have anything to add to the introduction? Chris, I will leave this the beginning part to you to give yourself a more self-introduction. How does that sound?
thank you for the introduction. I'm not very interesting as a person, so honestly, I think you did a really good job at making me sound somewhat interesting, and you said more stuff than I probably would. I just try to keep busy so that I stay out of trouble, because I find that when I'm not busy, I get in trouble. But anyway, I am going to try to share a screen here. You're going to tell me if it's the right screen since I have three. Does this seem like it's probably the screen I want to show you? Does it look like a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're going to talk about the problem that sometimes comes up in language learning, any language at all. This talk is completely language non-specific, language neutral. We're going to talk about the problem of studying a language yet not being able to understand very much of what people say in that language. So in this session, we're going to do three things. Describe our and our students' experiences understanding or not understanding fluent speakers of the language they're learning. We're going to explain why language learners struggle to understand fluent speakers, and we're going to propose some strategies for dealing with this problem. All right. But first of all, I kind of forgot that there'd be an official introduction, so I just put this little slide in here. You can call me either Chris or CJ, or you can make up another name for me. I have all kinds of names. And my boss thinks that I teach French, Italian, and Spanish at UNK, which is a medium-sized regional public university in rural Nebraska. In a town that you surely haven't heard of if you're not from Nebraska, as I hadn't before I started working here. And before that, I taught in university and K-12 settings in my home state of Pennsylvania. I grew up mostly in Pennsylvania, but also Maryland and DC. And even though I've spent most of my professional career as some sort of a language teacher, I've also worked some in translation and interpretation. And when I am not doing work stuff, I like to travel. I like to go to new restaurants and go out to cultural activities. And I really like all things languages, cultures, museums, arts, fashion, design. I have a lot of different interests, though I guess maybe they're not typical Nebraska interests, but it's nice to be different, right? So anyway, enough about me. As I said, I'm not very interesting. I am going to ask you guys a few yes or no questions. And to answer these questions, please either raise your yellow Zoom hand, you know, like the emoji hand, or literally raise your hand. We're going to do one question at a time. So, question number one. Have you studied a second or foreign language? Doesn't matter how far you got or how fluent you are. Have you studied a second or foreign language? Raise your hand, literal or Zoom hand, if the answer is yes. Okay, something told me that there'd be a lot of yeses to that. So, next question, yes or no question. Raise your hand if you now can, or could at a time, if maybe you took this language a while ago, communicate in the language you studied. It's not a given. It might sound like a dumb question, but it's not a given. I've taken languages that I can't communicate in and honestly never could. All right. And also, yes or no question. Raise your hand if you can now or could at a time understand what fluent speakers said in the language that you studied. Also not a given. I've taken languages, but not being able to understand them very well. I have a feeling it's probably more people than hands I see. And last question. Raise your hand if you have had difficulty understanding what target language speakers said in the language you studied. Can be your hand or your Zoom hand. You can admit it. We're not judging. I know that I have had definitely trouble understanding languages that I took. And most of the time, maybe even all the time, it is not the learner's fault. Well, maybe if they don't do their homework or something, but most of the time, it's not the learner's fault. All right, so I know it's hard to do this on Zoom compared to doing it in a face-to-face workshop, but hopefully I've at least got you thinking about this problem or potential problem. So we're going to look a little bit at why this happens, but first I want you guys in breakout rooms to talk a little bit about these questions. I'm going to copy these questions in the chat since you probably won't be able to see my screen share when I put you in breakout rooms. Here they are. Yep, that went through. So how many groups am I going to divide you in? Maybe I'm going to divide you in like 3 groups if that works for you. I'm going to stop the screen share and I'm going to create the groups. There we go. I'm going through the groups thing. And how long should I give you for the groups? Maybe somewhere around 5 to 7 minutes. I'm not much of a numbers guy. What do you think?
5 minutes is fine.
5 minutes is fine. Let's go for about 5 minutes and see what happens. You all have the questions in the chat. Please talk about those questions for the next 5 minutes or so. I'll set a timer. See you soon. Please accept the invitation. You're invited to an amazing party.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
No problem. You know you want to accept that invitation to the party. It's a great party. I'm trying to set a timer now on my phone. Set.
Chris, can you join the rooms?
Yes, I can. Would you like to join a room or would you rather not?
I'm the host. If I'm gone, I'm not sure what happened.
I think the host can join rooms.
Okay.
Let's see what'll happen. Let's find out.
I mean, if I'm gone, there's nobody in the recording. It's
Or actually,
recording.
I don't even see the option to send you to a room here. You're not even coming up.
Okay.
You know you wish you could, but I'm sorry. I might just go visit them to listen a little while, but I won't say much.
Okay. Do you want me to stop recording or continue?
Okay.
Were the breakout rooms that bad that you came back that quickly instead of taking those extra 60 seconds?
You know, it is never, we never wait until the last second. We want to see what's going
Okay. Speak for yourself, because I always wait to the last minute, but that's probably not a good thing.
I
and
didn't know there's a 60 seconds thing. I thought as soon as you receive the notice, you come back. So
No,
you want to announce when they all come back. Maybe we are the only person didn't know.
no, it's a countdown, and if
Yeah,
the end of the countdown comes, then the thing apparently kicks you out and puts you back into the main session, but it doesn't do that immediately. But
usually,
anyway,
yeah, usually the last 60 seconds is for, you know, people say, hi, nice to meet you, goodbye, see you in a bigger group. Like
yeah,
that.
basically. And now we see you in the bigger group. Thank you for coming back. Hopefully we didn't scare too many people away. So let's share a couple opinions on each of these. How well can you understand fluent speakers of the languages you've studied? You yourselves, not your students.
I'll go. We talked in my group how even after practicing the language for so long, when I switch from one language to the other, there's this momentary like switch or time when I'm not understanding either language and I'm just having to lag behind, and then I switch over into like Spanish when I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. So there's this momentary pause or, you know, lack of comprehension, but then I pick it up relatively quickly.
Interesting. Have other people felt that too, that you kind of have to shift gears, change modes to go from your primary language to your target language or the other way around?
Yes.
Yeah, I found a similar thing that like when I'm in class, I'm not totally completely immersion. So sometimes I have to switch back forth. And in between, sometimes like I kind of confused I'm speaking English or Chinese.
Oh yeah, the story of my life. I don't speak Chinese, but the same thing happens to me with other languages. And this is not the topic of today's thing, but I don't see any problem with judiciously, carefully, strategically using English or some language that your students speak fluently in class, as long as most of the class or as much of the class as humanly possible is in the target language. But that's not today's topic. let me phrase this question a different way. Have you, as language students, ever taken a language class and been like, OMG, as the kids say, oh my word, I do not understand anything, or I understand barely anything? And I don't mean just when you were like in a first semester or first year class that applies, but like when you had maybe taken 4 years in high school of whatever that language was and you still didn't understand much. Has anyone ever had that happen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Yes, I have made that before.
Really? That you took
Yeah.
a few years or more than a few years of a language and you still had trouble understanding it?
I think part of it might be how similar some of the languages are to one another or how different they are. Because I primarily teach Spanish, but if like I took an Italian class or a French class, I would feel relatively comfortable in there. I mean, I might miss a word or two, but I'd still be able to understand it. But on Duolingo, I'm trying to learn Arabic, and that one is
Interesting.
wildly different, and it's much easier for me to get lost.
Because it's wildly different, to use your word.
Well, I mean, it's like the structure of it, the appearance of Arabic compared to Spanish or Italian. It's very
Clearly.
different.
Not even the same writing system.
No. So I can imagine like going from Mandarin to English, that would probably happen too.
I can tell you that going from English to Mandarin's pretty scary. I've done that.
From my student's experience, because he's bilingual before he takes Chinese. So he said when he started learning Chinese, he using his secondary language, which is he speaks English most of the time, right? But he speaks Spanish at home because he's a Spanish background, and he would process my Chinese into Spanish and then into English. So I'm guessing if people have multi-language skills, when they process a new language, they may use other way they deal with world languages and to process that. And for me, like, because when I learned English as my secondary language, my second language is for the text purpose. So it's all text paper, all textbook. So we are learning something that is not in the speaking world. Which means sometimes we see people learning Chinese in this country are using the textbook several decades ago. So the language we never use nowadays. So it can be the same thing. When we speak English, we speak textbook English, and many years ago textbook English. And people don't understand us, or people feel weird when we speak English. And we can hardly get them because even hello in English can be many ways. And I stumbled at when people say "What's up" at the beginning.
Or sup. Or bruh. Yo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you all.
Yeah.
But that all means hello.
Yeah, same thing happened in Chinese too. Have you ate? Right, that's actually greeting.
That means hi. That doesn't mean did you eat?
Yeah, that's not actually ask did you eat. It's just like a greeting way in Chinese. Like I hear about
Really?
yeah.
Is that a standard registered greeting that you would likely learn in a language class, or is that something more informal?
It's an informal way, but lots of language teachers actually will mention about that, especially in like in some area that is kind of a standing grading way. So many people use it. Yeah.
So we're saying that one possible reason that we or our students don't understand fluent speakers very well is because textbook language is more formal, more standardized, or even old and like not current, and it doesn't match what you hear out in the real world. Am I understanding that right?
Agreed.
That was
Okay.
It's Because there is always a lacking time when a textbook was produced. The other way is for beginners, I don't think they want to confuse the learners. We can say hello in multiple ways. We just say hello this way. And that's why students, when they learn the only one way to express hello, they would nail down it and then remember this forever.
Sure. Yet also, if they only know one way to say hello, they go to somewhere that speaks your target language, someone says hello to them in a different way, and it's like, what? Like if I said to instead of hello, sup. Some people might not know that that means hello because it's not what you typically learn in a language class, right?
Yeah.
Agree.
Any other ideas besides mismatch of register or currentness, if that's a word, between books and the real world of why we don't understand?
Yeah, I have on the issue of online. I used to take students to China, and then students can understand me, and
Sure.
they don't understand anybody else. Yeah. Is that because they sort of used to the way I speak Chinese, and then because I use teacher language or mother race this kind of language, but then when they go to China, they are not Chinese teachers, and then maybe there's a better way of teaching them so that they can understand other speakers well too. Yeah.
So you see that your students understand you, but not other people who speak Chinese, and you think that's maybe because you use some kind of teacher talk and other people that they meet don't use that same kind of teacher talk.
Yeah, and also they used to my accent in Chinese too, because when they go, then they go to different parts of China, and people have. I noticed that even just a little variation, and it's challenging for my students to understand. Yeah, so I need to think of ways to overcome this kind of a challenge also.
So it's not just that you use teacher talk, that you maybe speak more slowly, more clearly, be sure to use like really standard words, but also that sometimes they come across people who have a different accent from you, that maybe to you as a native or fluent speaker, the accent difference isn't that big, but to them it's really big and it's enough to confuse them.
Well, yeah, the dialect, it does have a huge impact on what they're familiar with and how they learn. Like, for instance, I was mainly educated in Spain, and yet most of the teachers, they teach kind of the Latin American dialect with it. So sometimes I'll use a word or a phrase that's more European than North or South American. And sometimes when they come across another person, they'll be confused. Like, is this the same thing? Does it mean the same thing?
Well, that happens even with native speakers. Pardon, Rachel?
I was just going to say I kind of had the opposite experience. Most of my teachers and professors were speaking Spanish, but now most of my students, my native speakers are from Latin America or not Spain. So it's kind of the opposite. They're like, are you speaking Spanish? So the opposite of Danielle.
Interesting. So we think that accent or regional variety can definitely be a factor in listening comprehension. This is a tricky one because this is even a problem for native speakers. Like, I don't know if for your language teaching, you use Sefer or Actful or maybe even something else for standards. I personally use Sefer because it's more internationally known, and for when we send our kids to study abroad, it's easier for equivalencies. But anyway, in the very highest level of the Sefer scale, it's called C2, letter C as in cat. It says something along the lines of, for listening comprehension, I can understand basically everything that people say, provided that the accent is familiar. And this is the very highest level. So this reflects that even at the highest possible level of proficiency, and I imagine it's the same for ACTFL. I don't know ACTFL standards as well. They still say that even at the highest levels, accent or regional variety can be a variable that sometimes makes it difficult or even impossible for us to understand. There's ways to get around this, but this one is trickier than some of the other things we've mentioned. I can even say that as a native English speaker, there's English varieties outside the US and even within the US with which I've come in little contact that I honestly don't understand very well. And maybe other English speakers here feel the same way, or people who speak a different language as a native language have had similar experiences in their native language. But yeah, accent is definitely a factor. So let me ask you at least one more question before we go on to the next part. There's a little presentation and some more interaction. So in your language classes that you took as students, how did your teachers teach listening comprehension? Did they teach listening comprehension? That's not as dumb a question as it sounds.
I don't remember a lot of the listening comprehension activities, but I know that almost every single one was from a textbook curriculum. It was very automated. It was very not natural or native speakers.
It is always a test oriented. It's a ABCD choice. So it's kind of you listen while listening, you guess the possible answers, and you have only 4 possible choices, for example. And it's unlike in real life when you listen to something and there's no multiple choices. You have to process yourself.
So you've been taught listening.
And I
through...
don't think my teacher, excuse me. Yeah.
Yes, please.
I don't think my teacher talk about listening strategies and then just say, oh, listen more. And then we don't get the sentence and then just play the tape again and then play the tape again. And then and I don't think there is any pre-listening activity and then post during, and I was just like, you just need to listen more. Yeah, and I just find that challenging to improve my listening skill. But as a teacher myself, and I also find it difficult, challenging to improve my students' listening comprehension and skill. Yeah, so I'm not blaming my teacher. I need to. That's why, Chris, I'm here.
We're all here to learn. What I'm getting is that some of the things your teachers did or didn't do was that they used really fake, artificial recordings or videos that just didn't sound anything like the real world, that they gave you activities to go with them, like multiple choice or true and false activities in context where that's probably not what you would find in the real world. I mean, sometimes you're looking in the real world for a yes or no answer, or from a very small list of choices, but many times it's kind of open-ended. And also another factor might be that our teachers didn't really help us enough in developing listening strategies. They were just like, listen, we didn't get it. Listen again, listen harder, listen better. But what does that mean? What am I listening for, right?
So
Yes,
maybe,
please.
yeah, maybe I have a little bit different idea because for me, especially I prepared for IELTS test before, or during that process, actually, like the teachers who is not from normal school, it's usually like a class or kind of like a tutoring session. So for the IELTS, they do use the real conversation, or they do use the kind of like have the background sound. Like if it's in airport, you can hear there's announcement, or there's the landing sound from the airport. And when I prepared that, my teacher do play those things and try help me to prepare myself, focus. Okay, now you are in airport, so imagine what are you going to have, what information is the one you need to listen to. So I guess it's also depends on what kind of what's the purpose for you to to learn this. Like if you are pay attention to the information, then it's the results will be a little bit better. So today, when I was doing the listening practice with my students, sometimes I will let them read the question before actually we start the listening. Okay, go over the question, what is asked about, what's each item there, what it could be about, right? Each item, what's the difference about there? Maybe you don't know the answer, but from the question part, could you predict what kind of information you will get, or what question it might be? So that's something actually I do in my class. That's what I learned from my formal experience.
So your teacher did help you to develop listening strategies by setting up the context to make sure that you knew what you were listening for, and also walking you through the listening activity. And you have decided to do the same thing with your students.
Yeah, that's
nice. Listening strategies are definitely very, very useful. And we're going to look at listening strategies a little bit later. We're going to look at a little outline of not what you have to do, but what you could do if you just don't know where to start with listening strategies. But in the meantime, here are some reasons based on research on the topic of why fluent speech is often hard to understand for language learners. All this is completely language neutral because it's fast, at least relative to what you hear in textbook recordings, because there are filler words, meaningless words that take up space, like in English, yeah, like, well, those kind of things. Those words don't mean much, but they are part of natural language, right? And I imagine that the languages that you teach or have learned all have filler words too, if they're not English. Also, going with that, but not exactly the same thing, another feature that kind of makes fluent speech difficult to understand is false stops or hesitations. Let me try to give you an example of that. So I was talking about false stops, hesitations. Wait, what? Yeah, oh yeah, I was talking about false stops and hesitations, that you have like that unnatural pause that doesn't really keep the conversation going forward, that doesn't really add anything, but that still is there and still happens. Make sense? And also another factor, and I would say that this is probably the biggest one, or the biggest one along with speed, is poor articulation, that people do not enunciate, that they do not pronounce their words clearly. And I am sure that at least when we're in non-teaching context, that none of us always pronounce our words clearly in languages that we are fluent in. People kind of blend words together, blend letters together, drop letters, drop sounds, and that can make language hard to understand for language learners. Another factor kind of going with that is colloquial language or familiar language or slang. And this doesn't have to be bad words, though I don't honestly believe bad words exist, because that's a value judgment. And these bad words are part of natural language. But anyway, I'm just talking about the words that aren't standard registered to formal registered textbook words that students often aren't prepared to deal with in a natural conversation. And going with that, and we have touched on this, another thing is we said accent, I skipped that one, but regional words or regionalisms, which can happen and especially happen when we're dealing with colloquial language and slang, but they don't only happen when we're dealing with colloquial language and slang. They happen in the standard register, in the register that you would likely learn in a language class too. Like, I put a couple words here that I, as a non-Midwesterner, did not understand when I started working in Nebraska, and that still, as someone who has a very strong non-Midwestern identity, that I have not adopted into my active vocabulary, but I do understand. And we have, I would say, soda, but people here seem to say pop for a non-alcoholic fizzy drink like Coke or Sprite. And for the thing that you drink water out of at work, at school, the machine that you push the button and a stream of water comes out, I would call that a water fountain or a drinking fountain. But people around here in Nebraska would call it a bubbler. I didn't know what a bubbler was. And
What is that
also,
for?
the thing that you push at the grocery store or some other stores like Walmart and Target, and even for you Midwesterners, Menards, never heard of Menards. That thing is called, for me, a shopping cart or just a cart, or a grocery cart if it's the grocery store. But out here, they seem to call it a buggy. And these seem to be, in the Midwest, standard register words that if a Midwesterner were making an English ESL textbook, they would probably include these words as standard register words because they seem to be that. But native English speakers from other parts of the US do not understand these words. And native English speakers from other countries, there's many other countries that speak English, likewise don't understand these words. And the same happens between different countries that speak the same language. I'm obviously not going to go through this whole big chart, but you see on the right of the slide here that I have a chart that compares standard register, not slang, not colloquial, general American, and British English vocabulary. And some of these things could probably make sense to someone from the other side of the ocean, at least based on context, but some of these you really can't figure out if you don't specifically know, like flat versus apartment. That's not very evident. Jumper versus sweater. Let's see what else. Holiday versus vacation. You get the point. Some of these you can't really infer that well. So these regional differences, at least in languages spoken in large areas, and not only in languages spoken in large areas, are definitely something we have to contend with, along with the speed, the filler words, the false stops, the poor articulation, and the unfamiliar accent. Accent is pronunciation, not vocabulary. So now that we see there's a lot of factors that make speech difficult to understand, this is just to show you how much North American English varies. Let's talk about what we can do with it. So I'm sure there's many more solutions, but there's at least two big solutions that came to my mind that we're going to talk about today. One of them is authentic, or if you prefer, non-learner centered listening materials. What these are is materials, whether they be videos or recordings, and it can be written text too, but we care about listening today. These are materials that are made by and for fluent target language speakers. They are not made for people learning the language. So news would be authentic materials. Literature would be authentic materials. Social media that doesn't have a specifically language learning purpose would be authentic materials. Makes sense, right? And the second solution that I personally see is conversation with fluent speakers, people who may or may not be native speakers. It's not really important in the end, in my opinion, whether they're native speakers, but people who speak the language really well. And honestly, this is a topic for a different day, but contact with fluent non-native speakers could actually be really useful for students because it can give them a realistic idea of whom they can become. You have a very occasional, even rare student who's just so motivated, so gifted, so in tune to phonetics, to sounds, that can actually become native or native-like. But that's not most of us. So it's kind of nice to have examples of what's realistic. But anyway, students, in my opinion, should start using authentic materials and start interacting with fluent speakers very, very early in their language learning career. Maybe not the first day of class, though you could, I guess, where you're just learning to say, hi, my name is CJ. I mean, if you find authentic materials that have that, which you probably can, go for it. But anyway, you should start, in my opinion, authentic materials and contact with fluent speakers very early. But as we've alluded to, in order for students to make sense of both of these, we need to help them develop some strategies. All right? So let's talk about authentic materials first. We're not going to talk about finding the authentic materials because that is very language and level dependent, and we all have very different languages and levels. But anyway, no matter what, you're going to first establish your communicative lesson objectives. What does that mean? To give you objectives from my most recent classes in B1 French the other day, our lesson goal was to describe our last vacation. And another lesson goal related to that, to compare our last vacation to our classmates' last vacations. So what would a good authentic material related to that be? Maybe a YouTube video where someone talks about their vacation. Or better yet, a travel vlog, not blog, but vlog, where someone makes a video to show their trip and hopefully in a very natural way uses the past tense, since that was the grammar form that we were trying to look at, kind of hidden into the lesson. I never, ever, ever put grammar topics in my lesson goals because communication is what matters most. But grammar is an important component of language, and it's nice to add things to our toolbox, including grammar, to help us communicate. But anyway, we first need to establish our communicative objectives. And then once we find a authentic material, like for that class, a travel vlog, we should ask ourselves, is this authentic material relatively current? I'm not going to put like a number of days, weeks, months, or years on that, but just use your judgment. Is this thing relatively current, or is this really, really old and the students aren't going to see the value of it? And related to that, but not identical, will the students find it interesting? So a material can be really, really recent, but not interesting at all. Like a news story on a topic that we don't care about at all. That's recent, but it's not interesting to us. And also, we should ask ourselves, will learners be able to understand the authentic material given appropriate scaffolding? A lot of people will talk about this last question in terms of comprehensible input. I know it's not a super popular opinion, but I'm not a big comprehensible input person, mainly because I think personally that comprehensible input kind of turns into almost a religion, that it is like a very tightly observed, very tightly defined way of language teaching. That's like, follow these rules, and that's how you teach. Do I think that comprehensible input is a good thing? Yes, I do. But in a pure comprehensible input approach, you don't necessarily learn to understand natural fluent speech. And also, this is a topic for another day, but in a pure comprehensible input approach, you don't learn to produce language, or at least you don't learn to produce it in natural ways like you would if you were having a conversation. But anyway, when we choose an authentic material, we of course want to make sure that it's something that the learners can understand given the right support. The support could be making your questions less open-ended, like instead of fully open-ended questions, making them multiple choice. The support could be pre-listing activities. The support could be doing vocab activities before you do the listening. The support could be giving the students time to read the questions beforehand, to develop a game plan. And it doesn't even have to be just one of those. It can be all those together. And it can even be being, well, I guess this kind of goes with those, but not adapting the material itself, other than maybe for length, because we don't always have time for long videos in class. But instead of adapting the material itself, adapting the task, the activity we do with it to the learner's level and to the learning goals. Personally, I'm a big proponent of adapting the task rather than adapting the materials. I don't adapt materials, which does not mean that I don't scaffold them, other than for length, since we don't always have time for the full thing. So, how could we give students support more concretely? Here's an example from a basic A1 to A2 level French class. Actually, I did this lesson in B1, but I did it on one of the first couple days when we were doing an A1, A2 review. So the lesson goal here was to choose a roommate based on hobbies and personality. The first thing we did, other than stating the lesson goals, of course, was a pre-listening activity where I give the students a minute most, to think about their answers, then have them share in a small group of 2, 3, 4, and then have them share their answers all together. And I had them answer questions, seeing what you see now. What do you think this guy likes to do in his free time? And also, what do you think his personality is like? Because we're selecting a roommate based on activities you like and personality. And also, these questions kind of get us thinking about what we're going to hear in the video. And you will be pleasantly surprised that very often students can infer or assume a lot more than you might think they would. And after we do think, pair, share, independent work, pair, work, then share some answers together for this, we go to the listening activity. And before we do the listening activity, in reality, I sometimes forget, but ideally, I will ask the students to read the questions or look over the outline and to ask me if they have any questions about what they're being asked to look for. And this time, the questions were pretty simple. There were only 2 of them. Obviously, I asked them in French. Well, I guess that's not obvious, because sometimes people in basic levels prefer to ask their listening comprehension questions in a language the students are comfortable with. But I prefer not to. I prefer to have everything in the target language, and if I really, really have to, I'll use English or something they're comfortable with. But I prefer the target language. Anyway, my questions here were, what does this guy like to do, and what is his personality like? We watched the video. It's just over a minute long, 3 times, with giving them a little pause, maybe 30 seconds between each viewing in case they wanted to scribble some stuff down. And then after we did that, I gave the students a minute or 2 to compare their answers with classmates before we went over this all together. And of course, we answered these 2 questions together. And then we went on to the post-listening, which is past comprehension, making some sort of evaluation or decision on it. We decided if we were right, we generally were, with what we could tell. And we also had to make the more important decision that goes with the lesson goals. Is this guy a good roommate for us? Yes or no, and why? And the answers would be based on his hobbies and or his personality. Make sense? And I didn't do it this time, though for no good reason other than time, but another good pre-listing activity after what do you think he likes to do and what do you think his personality is, would be to show the video with the image but no sound, and to see what the students get out of that. With some videos, they can understand basically everything they have to. They can completely answer the questions without even hearing the sound at all. And this trains the students to pay attention to everything, to the whole picture, not just to what they hear. All right? So, what else? This is another example with the same general outline, but this is from an intermediate B1, B2 level French class. This is real stuff from the past few days of my French classes, where the lesson goal was to choose a career based on your strengths, interests, values, and goals. And this is a special intermediate class that is specifically focused on professional development to help students recognize their skills, evaluate career paths, and apply for jobs and do job-related tasks. So just to give you a little more context. And in this case, likewise with the basic class, we did a pre-listening activity. We asked them, how do you think you should choose a career and why? what careers interest you and why. And we again use think, pair, share. Then we listened to the video, hopefully assuming I remembered, after having the students read the outline and ask me any questions they might have on it. And based on the video, they had to answer the questions. What are the criteria of a good career? What should you consider when choosing a career? And what questions should you ask to choose a career? I asked them more or less in this way, but of course in French. I'm generally not a big fan of multiple choice and true and false, though there are situations where those kind of questions make sense. And after we listened to the video maybe 3 times, then had the students share their answers with a friend and went over the answers together as a class, we did a post-listening, slightly different, but it's a different video, where we asked what the students thought of these tips. Are they good, bad, why? And how the students will apply them in their own career decisions. And also how the students feel about their original, as in earlier in the class, decision regarding a career. Do they still think that's a good choice, given the tips from the video? Why or why not? And yes, I didn't do it, but I likewise could have done a silent listening here, right after I asked the students what they thought about career choices and right before we listen. And actually, it could be really useful for this video because there's a lot of graphics and there's a lot of words, captions on the screen. So that could definitely be useful here. Also, the second thing that we talked about as a potential solution for not understanding fluent speakers, in addition to authentic or non-learning center materials, was interaction with fluent speakers. How could you do this in your language classes? Some of it, unfortunately, depends on your teaching context, but we can invite special guests to class, be it through video conference or literally in your classroom. We can have language tables like French table, German table, Chinese table, whatever language it is, where students converse in that language with their peers and with at least one person who is fluent in that language. I have a picture of our French table here. The girl on the left is a B1 level French learner. The guy on the right is a native French speaker from Belgium. And a variation of this is language partner activities. I'll show you what those can look like, where students have one-on-one or maybe two-on-one meetings with a fluent speaker. Could be open-ended conversation. For some students with a high enough level and good enough general conversational skills, even in their native language, that works well, but other students need more support. And also, as a variation to language partners, there's online language exchanges. And I'm not necessarily an educational technology expert. I like educational technology, but I'm kind of the mindset that once I find an app that works, I don't feel the need to keep searching and learn about all the apps. But these are 3 of the most popular that I have heard people use in language classes and for just personal language learning. italki, HelloTalk, and Talk Abroad. So you're probably wondering, what kind of activity could a student do at a language table with a language partner or with a virtual language partner from one of these sites? Well, I will give you 2 examples. The example on the left, and this was from, I can't remember, within the past couple of weeks of my B1 French class, but when we were still reviewing A1, A2 content. And the other one is from that same intermediate level professional French class. And let's look at the first task first. It's in French, but I'll translate what's important. On the left, we have the A1, A2 task where the goal is to find a roommate, kind of like that first video that I showed you. I try to have a whole bunch of different tasks that lead to the same goal and that practice all different skills or modes. But anyway, I asked them here, would your language partner be a good roommate for you? Ask him about the following topics to find out. And the following topics are morning routine, night routine, hobbies or free time, personality, strong points, and weak points. I just had my screen blocking. That's why I had to move there. And then I asked them for a decision. Would your language partner be a good roommate for you? Explain your response. You can turn in your language partner's responses to the questions along with a 2 to 3 word answer, 2 to 3, sentence answer to this question. Or instead of this, you can opt to turn in a 100 to 150 word reflection summary of your conversation where you tell about what you talked about and give your reaction to it. All right, that is a basic level conversation partner task. What about an intermediate level conversation partner task with the goal of choosing a career? So the directions here say, using the following outline, talk with your language partner about the person's choice of profession. At the end, turn in a small summary reaction of about 100 to 150 words. And the topics they should talk about: interest and hobbies, personality, strong points, weak points, current or future profession, and why this profession, and also the professions that the person would not like at all and why not. And lastly, what this person thinks that you as the student should take into account when choosing a profession. And I forgot to tell you who my language partners are. My language partners include other teachers, retired teachers, language majors and minors who have a higher level than my students, and also international students who are native or otherwise fluent speakers of the language. And in the case that my students have someone in their life, a good friend, a family member, a coworker, whatever, who speaks the language too, they can ask me for permission to have these conversations with that person instead. And I generally say yes, because I do want them to connect with their family, their friends, their coworkers. And in the end, it's not really important to me who they talk to. It's important that they have speaking practice and listening practice with fluent speakers of the language. And notice I said fluent speakers rather than native speakers, because yeah, I think it's great that they talk to native speakers, but I also think it's great that they talk to fluent non-native speakers who can kind of give them a little bit of motivation, that the students could think, if that person did it, if that person learned French, I can learn French too. I can also get to be at a high level of French. And I've kept saying French, but because that's what I teach right now, but none of this in terms of methodology is French specific. All of this would apply to any language whatsoever. So hopefully you can see a way that you can maybe adapt this to your context. And we're getting close with time. That's all I have for the lecture/presentation part, but I did prepare a few more questions that I was hoping that we could discuss in small groups and then together. But I guess I should ask how our meeting leaders want us to proceed, if they want to do this or if they want to go to open-ended questions or what. Should we go through the, pardon? Yes.
Yeah, teachers, we're actually 5 minutes beyond the time we planned to, but I think people are interested. Do you have questions? If you have questions, you either type in the chat or unmute yourself, just start talking. Questions. And I think we have, let's leave 5 more minutes for discussions. If we have further questions, they may contact Dr. Liu or just send email to you about that.
Sure, I'll write my email in the chat right now.
Yeah, I was. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Let me stop the screen
Yeah.
share because it's slowing down my computer.
Yeah, we actually have 20 more. My bad. I need another cup of coffee. So,
So if we have 20 or so minutes, I guess we have a little time to talk through these questions, right?
yeah. Yeah.
I am going to copy them into the chat then, because again, the screen share kind of slows down my computer. And I think I'm going to divide you into 3 or so groups again. And you can talk about these questions, thinking about how you would apply what we talked about in this session or what you've heard anywhere else to your teaching of listening comprehension. And should we say I'll give you about 5 minutes at least to start? As you see with me going a little over, I have a very rough perception of time. I guess it's part of Southern European culture. We just have a very rough perception of time. That means we're flexible, right?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Chris.
Yes, please.
So when you have partnership, I saw the picture, a girl and a boy. The girl is a French learner, the boy is a native speaker. So
Yes.
how would you find the students together? Do you send out information to the college students? How can you get those? I mean,
How
in
do I
college,
find the language partners?
yes, inside the campus, because they can meet each other, right? They don't have to,
Yes, it's up to them. They can meet face to face, they can talk on the phone, they can talk on Zoom. The modality is not important to me as long as they're speaking rather than writing and in doing it in real time. But anyway, to get language partners, I ask my coworkers, who do you know who speaks French fluently that you think could be a conversation partner? And I get a few names that way. And I contact those people. I also asked the International Student Office, and I asked, who do you have who is a fluent French speaker? Can I have their names and their emails so that they can be conversation partners for my kids? And that is generally how I get conversation partners.
Hmm.
And the students then sign up for conversation partner appointments in a shared Word document, a web-based Word document, where they have the schedules and contact information of each of the conversation partners. Each conversation partner chooses 2 hours when they're available every week through the semester. And to not confuse us, they should be the same 2 hours for every semester, for every week rather. And I divide those 2 hours into 20-minute slots for 15-minute meetings with a little bit of buffer between the meetings. And my students go into that shared Word document to sign up for an appointment. And then they have to send a quick email to the conversation partner, just saying something like, hi, I signed up for a conversation partner meeting with you on Thursday at 4 p.m. And that's really all they have to say. And I indicate in the shared document after I get it from the conversation partner, if that person prefers to talk in person, by Zoom, on the phone, or doesn't care. And in the case it doesn't care, then the students have to figure that out in their initial contact email that they send. But most of them have a pretty clear preference, which is good because it's one less thing that they have to negotiate.
I see. Good, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, a lot.
Thank you very much for the details because and Su Laoshi, I have the similar question also, and I'm just thinking about for I was hoping that the exchange can be more mutually beneficial in a sense, and so that it's more sustainable. So I want to pick your brains to say how to make it sustainable. So because like my students can definitely help the in a sense help them if they're native speaker or if they're improving their English, help them with their English. I just wonder if you have any pointers on that. Yeah.
Yes. If I had the choice, as in if we were a big campus with enough international students, I would probably have all of my conversation partners be international students so that it could be more mutually beneficial, but we don't usually have enough native French speaking or fluent French speaking international students. And in the case that my students meet with international students, it's obviously not part of the class because I don't teach ESL, but yes, I do want them to become friends and have some sort of exchange where both people can learn about the other person's language and culture. And that often does happen. They often do become friends. They will talk not as part of these tasks. They'll text, they'll Snapchat, they'll Insta, they'll correspond with each other in ways that have nothing to do with the class, which is great because then they have new friends and they have people who are fluent speakers of the language they're learning, which is great for both, but it's especially great for the international students because international students, at least at a not very diverse rural campus like the one I currently work, sometimes have trouble finding their niche. Since our campus is just so homogenous and our rural students as a whole are not well traveled at all and are not very exposed to different languages and cultures. So it's not that they're rude, but at least not knowingly, but the local students just don't always know how to reach out to bring in these international students who don't share the same cultural background. But having these language exchanges initially for class kind of provides both groups an opportunity to actually interact with each other, and it breaks the ice that they don't have to just run up to each other on the street. And I think it's a good thing for both.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. Thank you. Give me a lot
You're
of
welcome.
ideas, great ideas.
And yes, I agree with the field trips and the service learning projects, though obviously the feasibility of this depends on where you teach, what language you teach, and what kind of target language speakers are in your community. If I'm teaching French and Italian in middle of nowhere, rural Nebraska, as I currently am, it's very complicated. But if I were teaching Spanish in the same context, very doable because there's a lot of Mexican and Central American people who work in different agricultural industries. Or if I were teaching Italian in New York or French in pretty much any major city or near the Canadian border in New England or in Louisiana, in places like this with a big local culture, target language culture, yeah, these service learning projects would definitely be very feasible and very, very good for the students' learning. And professional development too, depending on what they're doing. Any other questions, comments, and remarks?
Yes, I'd like to go back to your conversation partner and
Sure.
those appointment. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you actually assign a task for your student for those appointments, or they
That's
just
correct.
talking?
Task like what I showed you. My students know that they have to complete this task with their conversation partner. They can choose who their conversation partner is based on time availability and who they best get along with. But at the same time, I tell my students, try to alternate between conversation partners as much as your schedule permits so that you get to meet other people and have different perspectives. And what I'm thinking, but don't tell them, is also so the really, really popular ones get to have appointments with everyone so that every kid gets to have the really popular ones. But I don't tell my students that.
Thank you.
I do sincerely believe the different perspective part too. So I'm not lying. That's not a cover story. It's just a partial story.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments, and remarks? So we still have a bit of time. Should we do breakout rooms or do you want to talk all together? I don't have a strong preference.
I think we can have more discussion in here rather than develop into divided into small groups. Teachers, you can also share your way of teaching comprehension and and how would you do it? And then by sharing, we also can help each other get more ideas.
Sure, we can do this all together. Let's combine these questions into one big question. How do you, or if you don't, would you teach listening comprehension?
Well, something for me, I try to find as authentic recordings as possible. And a couple of sites I've actually found where they meet that sweet spot of, yes, it's authentic recording, but at the same time, it's also leveled appropriately for students. My favorite site, it's Audiolingua. And you can search for topics there specifically and language levels. It's based on the European framework with the ABC, but I really like that site. I'm going to put the link in the chat here for
I'm
that.
looking it up on my iPad. Is this only available in Spanish, or is this available in other languages too?
It's offered in over a dozen languages: English, French, Spanish, Italian, Chinese, Russian, Arabic. It's everywhere. Yeah. And you can download the recordings and embed them in learning management systems, or, like Google Classroom or things like that. And they're just like little snippets. They have anywhere from, 30 seconds to, I think, upwards of 3 minutes, maybe.
Oh, wow. I think I might have found it. Is this from the French government, Académie de Versailles? Is it that website, or it's a different one with a similar name?
That's the one.
Oh, nice. Yeah, this looks great. This has every language that is regularly taught in the United States, and some others that Americans typically don't learn, like Corsican and Catalan and Occitan, which are regional languages in France.
Yep. And yeah, like I said, you can search for a topic, like if you want to talk about celebrations or if you want to talk about travel. And you can also find them at appropriate language levels. So with your level 1 and 2s, you can look for A1 and A2. But if you want to challenge your students, you can look for, B1, B2, or even C1.
Oh, wow, this is fabulous. I've been looking for something like this. Thank you.
This is one of my favorite sites for grabbing authentic recordings.
Some things are really, depends on the topic. Some things are really easy to find on YouTube. That doesn't take that long. But there's other times that I'm ready to throw the computer across the room because I want an authentic text that's just too hard to find what I'm looking for.
Exactly. The only drawback is because it is an authentic recording, sometimes the audio quality is a little bit, it's not consistent, but there's plenty of recordings on there that you can search through.
But is that a drawback, that the quality of the sound is not very good? It might be mildly annoying, but don't students maybe need to also learn to understand things where there's poor sound quality or where there's background noise? Because sometimes we find that outside of language class. That's
a very good point. That is a very good point. I didn't think of that.
I know what you mean, though. That's less pleasant to listen to, but I see the learning value to it also. Thank you. I'm going to be looking at this when I make my lesson plans later today.
Be careful, you might get stuck on there for hours.
That's okay. Then I'll get some language learning myself. Any other ideas about how we teach or would teach listening comprehension?
So that's lingual.com. You need to log in, right?
Pardon?
Danielle.
For the Audiolingua, no, you don't have to have an account at all.
Let me check. Oh, this one. Okay. Maybe you can just search it from the Google, and it will show better result.
Yeah, let me try to find the actual website.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of similarly named websites that are not the same thing at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's not in is like a very different page.
They have less than Chinese than they have for some of the Western languages, but they still have a few hundred resources.
Okay, Crystal just posted the audio. It's 14 language and 8,255 MP3 file. Chinese
Wow.
is
Thank you, Crystal.
248 resource.
Mm.
And these are all supposed to be things that are made by and for fluent speakers.
Mhm.
That's correct. Yep.
Oh,
Oh.
wow.
And they're like, when I was looking through Spanish files, they're from all over the world. So South America, Central America, you know.
For,
Do they let you search by that? I'm looking in French. No, for French, at least they don't.
That might be one drawback there because of how widely taught Spanish is. It might have some more resources as well.
There's about the same number of resources, but I'm just seeing if there's a filter that you can choose the country, but it looks like there's not, neither for Spanish nor for French. But it's still, this is still great.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much. And I'm just thinking there are so many teachers in the room, and then this kind of a open educational resource is so helpful. So students don't have to pay. And then the one I know is called Slow Chinese. And I don't know whether other Chinese teachers know, but that's for the Chinese teachers. Yeah. So that's a lot of resources, and then it's and then a lot of the website, I think I tell students sometimes they have paid and unpaid, but I said just the non-paid, don't need to pay. The not paid part is good enough for us. I think this slow Chinese is totally free. I think there's just some everybody it takes so long to find good resources. If the teachers get together, just share the open educational resources like this platform has provided us, that's fabulous. Daniel, thank you so much. I've never heard of that the website. I'm definitely going to check it out.
Absolutely. I completely stumbled on it by accident. I was just doing Google search for free Spanish audio recordings and I came across it. I'm like, oh, this is amazing.
Oh, talk about Spanish. Actually, Duolingo have some podcasts. They have podcasts made for the Spanish speaker. So you also can search that. Unfortunately, they don't have for Chinese.
So these are podcasts that are not made for language learners, right? That are made by and for fluent speakers.
Yeah, I mean it is for the learning purpose, but I think like Duolingo for Spanish have both, like one for Spanish speaker who want to learn English, they have that, and also have like a non-Spanish speaker for who want to learn the Spanish. So I think yeah.
Who is the intended audience of the podcast? Are the podcasts made for Duolingo by Duolingo, or are these real podcasts made by fluent Spanish speakers for fluent Spanish speakers?
Let me try Duolingo podcasts.
I don't think that inauthentic or learner-centered materials are harmful, but they're not a substitute for authentic materials. They can be like a good lead up to authentic materials, but I think that if we use only those, then our students are not going to have the skills they need to understand a real podcast, a real movie, a real conversation.
So I'm going to share through the chat.
I think the Duolingo I tried once. I want to learn Korea, but I give up. It's so hard and complex for me, difficult, so I give up.
It was hard to use Duolingo, you say?
Kind of website, you can have a lot of language you can try to learn by yourself, some such as Spanish, whatever. I tried Korea, South Korea, or Korean language, but it's so difficult for me, so I give up.
I don't think that this is a different topic, but I don't think that Duolingo is a complete language learning experience. I think it's a great way to get some vocabulary or grammar practice or to expand your vocabulary and grammar, but it does not help you develop in itself real communicative skills. It's a support to other communicative methods. Obviously, the people who make Duolingo are going to want to make you think that it's a complete language learning method, but it's not. And I don't want to say it's impossible because I'm not a software developer, but I think it would be really, really hard for an app, especially one that you're using asynchronously, that you don't have a class on it or a video call on it. I think it would be really hard for an app to be a complete language learning experience because you really need that real-time spontaneous interaction with fluent speakers.
Yeah, correct. That's why we need our teacher.
Yes. People like all of
Absolutely,
you.
agree. Yeah, because when you look at West Virginia, what's happening in West Virginia, and then their university and shutting down their whole foreign language department. Yeah, so which and then they were also thinking about the AI, and then the students can learn. Yeah, so I think more than ever as teacher ourselves, and then platform and that Professor Liu organizes, and then Sun Laoshi organize and inviting expert like Chris, this kind of discussion that show it's really important to have a teacher in the classroom, right? Yeah, rather than just say save money and cut the budget and then just let students learn from the website.
I think that AI can be a great support to language learning when used correctly. It provides a lot of input, it provides a lot of practice, but interacting with AI, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not the most techie person in the world, cannot completely mimic this interaction that you have in real time in a conversation with a target language speaker.
But my school actually tried to find if we can incorporate AI into our teaching, because eventually all the students will use AI. Therefore, I think the important thing is we have to have the student has the 21st century skills. So I think we shouldn't just exclude AI. We should consider how to incorporate AI into our teaching. It's just my thought.
I agree. I don't think it should be the whole language class, but I think it can be a good support to a language class.
I think for us, another thing I want to mention is about what actually is the skill you want to practice. Because when I was doing listening, lots of time it's just it requires students to write down the words or actually write a whole sentence. So that actually is to ask students to like how quick you can take a note. We want actually them to practice just the listening comprehension skill, or actually we want them to practice a Chinese character writing skill. That's something maybe we need to think about. So sometimes I will modify the task. Like, yes, you can take note in English. As long as you prove you understand the contents, it's enough for me. Like we can do later, I will give a later time to maybe translate it. But the moments we are practicing is for listening comprehension. So sometimes I will modify the task and actually separate the steps for students.
That's an interesting point. In a language like the ones that I teach that uses Latin script like English, I would rather not let them write in English so that they're not learning to translate, but are learning to think in the language. But I agree when you're teaching a language with a vastly different writing system, like Chinese, that it could be useful to let them write in English, or if not in English, maybe in Pinyin. So they're still thinking in Chinese, but don't have to worry about the character, so that you're focusing on listening comprehension and not on character writing, which is I can tell you, someone who took 2 classes of Chinese, is a huge barrier to Chinese learning for anyone who does not come from a character-based language.
Yeah, So I will remind my students, please take note when you heard any important information. Doesn't matter you write down English, Chinese, or any language you're familiar with. That's the skill I want them master. That's the things I want them to do. Not about you can write the right words in limited time. That's not the goal. So yeah, that's what
I think that's a good idea. Though I think to keep it in target language, I might like go right down the middle and say you don't have to write characters, but you can, but at least write pinyin. So you're at least staying with Chinese words and Chinese sounds. But I don't have any functional knowledge of Chinese, and I'm sure that teaching Chinese is very different from teaching other languages.
It shouldn't be that different because languages are languages. So, yeah.
True. I mean, different just because you have the extra thing of the writing system.
Yeah, it is like the Japanese language. East Asian language, East Asian languages. That's why they have different standards. In our state, we have East Asian language, aside from European classical modern language standard. We have two form of standards.
I think that makes sense.
All right, I think it's about time. What if we have one last question? If it's not, I would rather let everybody leave the conference and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. We have a good weather today, not very hot. So
I don't think I'm going to be enjoying my afternoon. I have lesson plans.
oh, too bad.
I just heard you said our Chinese don't need teach character.
No, it's not teach, it's separate. Characters focused on character, listening focused on listening. It's more about that.
So we don't need teach student character, just pinyin, right?
No.
No. This is another big topic that we can have several sessions on that. But we can set aside to another session. Please keep an eye on keep an eye on our broadcast of information of seminars, and so we will talk about that in details for those who are interested.
Okay, okay, thank you. Have a great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for such a good interactive conversation among teachers. We really appreciate that. And then I think we got your way of teaching. We got some ideas how to get partners, how to, the listening comprehension be put forward. And plus we have a website shared, which has so many authentic materials. I'm really happy to know that. And I think I will explore that. Maybe I'll use partially my afternoon. But this is a very good. Dr. Liu, do you have any other message to send before teachers signing off this session of Zoom?
Yeah, if you need a certificate, PD certificate, please leave your name and the email here. It's very hard for me to get your email from registration system. I do not have access to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the me and putting up with me.
Thank you, CJ, for the great webinar. It's really, really good. And thanks to everyone for participating on our Saturday morning. We are great teachers. Thank you.
Yes, we are.
We are. We come for the, even on the weekend. So
we want to learn.
Yes. Teachers are, good teachers are always lifelong learners. So this is what we are. Thank you for all the life learning colleagues here today. Wish you have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, if you need.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Professor Liu.
No problem.
And thank you,
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody. And great breakout room and great chatting with our breakout room partners.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Nice weekend. Bye.
Bye. 刘老师，
啊，
我给您发了邮件，然后就是之前的那个survey 的结果，我发给您了。
好，我说一下。